Hey guys, welcome to another exciting coding video. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you are learning to code for the first time, I recommend starting with my complete beginner playlist. But if you're a returning viewer or if you already know how to code with C# Sharp and the Revit API, today we're going to be discussing how to delete import CAD lines from our Revit project. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment as this really helps me a lot. And let's get started with coding without any further ado. So I'm here in my Revit project and I've gone to my Manage tab, Additional Settings, and I want to see the line patterns I have on this project. As you can see, someone on my team has done something very wonderful. I'm being sarcastic in case you didn't catch that. However, someone has imported a CAD file into my project, and what has happened is they have corrupted my line patterns and also my line styles with CAD lines. If you've ever experienced this on a team and you're a BIM manager, I feel your frustration. Today, we're going to be making a script that will delete all of these lines, and we'll do that by basically searching for the first word in the line type, which in this case, luckily, it's all import, import, import. So we're doing kind of like a find delete instead of a find replace, if you're familiar with that function in Excel. And if you have other line types that don't start with import, it would be helpful to first do some auditing and create some kind of consistency or find some kind of consistency. It could be that they all have a dash D in the middle or that they end with a number or something, but there needs to be some degree of consistency for this code to work. However, in most cases, you'll find that the CAD lines come with an import at the beginning, so that's what we'll be using today. I'd just like to point out that there are many tools you can use for this. There is the Modelical package in Dynamo, and I think even the Crumple package has something, I'm not too sure. Basically, this is something where there are many ways to achieve this same goal. So this is just us getting familiar with how to do it with C# and the Revit API. Okay, enough talking. Let's go into coding. As usual, we are in our BIM Mentor project, and I've created a new class and I've called it Delete Import Lines. I have this code which is available in the boilerplate on my GitHub page, and I've gone ahead to add it to my Addin manifest file, delete import lines, with a new GUID so that I don't have to spend time doing this at the end. Once you've done these steps, we've done them several times in our previous videos, come back and then you can continue with the video on how to actually make the code. So looking at this, I have created an iExternal command and implemented the interface of the iExternal command, which will contain the command data, a message element set, and return a result.succeeded. I have then gone on to include some comments that will help us to know how we are structuring our code today. First, we'll get the active document, then we will filter to find line patterns inside this active document. We will then create an empty list of element IDs for these lines, and then do a for loop that will loop through all of the lines and return the ones that have imports in it. To support this for loop, we are creating a helper method for the project that will basically search through the entire project and return the lines that have imports in their names. Then we will create a transaction that will delete all the line patterns and return a message to show exactly how many of those line patterns were deleted. So let's start with getting the active document. To do this, as always, we create a document variable. Let's call it doc as usual. And to access this, we will go into our command data dot application dot active UI document dot document. We've done this before and it is also available in the boilerplate code, but we're just going to put it again here for emphasis. Then we want to create a filtered element collector that will go into the document and return all the line pattern elements. So we create a filtered element collector. Let's call it collector as always. New, because it's the first one. and we're running through the entire document looking for off class type of, and what we want here is line pattern element. Great. If we take a quick look at the Revit API docs, the line pattern element class has different members, methods, and properties that we can access. Today we'll be accessing its ID property, and this is what we'll be using to carry out deletion. The line pattern element represents a line pattern in a project. It enables the user to retrieve, modify, or create a line pattern in a project. So we'll be accessing this class again in our code, and this is how we'll be making our script work. Right, so now that we have our collector already created, let's make an empty list of element IDs. So we'll start with list, and it will be hosting element ID. Let's call our list lines to delete. We always start with an empty list because we'll end up creating a for loop that will then populate the list with the items we actually want to delete. And I'll call this new list element ID. Finishing up with the syntax to show that it's empty. Perfect. Then we want to create a helper method. The reason we're creating the helper method now is because we want it to work inside the for loop. So following the syntax for creating a method with C#, we'll make a private method, and it will be a bool because we want it to report true or false. And let's call it is imported line pattern, using the capitalized H word naming convention. And we want it to work with a line pattern variable in this case. And we'll just call that line pattern variable line pattern for the sake of simplicity. I'm just going to tab select so that this is implemented. Great. What we want to do here is create a string that is called pattern name. Just remove the extra P. And inside this string, we'll be accessing the .name method for line patterns. This means return the name of the line pattern. Awesome. Then we want to loop through and say if pattern name, which is the name of the line pattern in this case, contains import. So if there's imports in the start of the name of the line pattern, then we want to say return true. This means add it to our list that this line actually starts with import. Now, I actually used contains in this case, but it could be begins with, or starts with, or it could be ends with. There are many methods you can access in the pattern name to actually find a consistent convention in your line patterns. And that's why it's good to just achieve any kind of consistency. And then you'll be able to apply some sort of formula or code that will help you identify which lines came from CAD. In many cases, they already contain the word import, and so it's a safe choice to use for this purpose. We will be closing off our syntax with just one more curly bracket there. So now that we've added the last bracket, you can see that our function is still having a red line. This is because we haven't completed the syntax required. So we've already put a condition for the if statement to say return true. Instead of creating an else statement, what we'll do here is to just say return false. So what we're essentially saying is if the conditions aren't met, if nothing starts with import, then return false. This way, the two conditions required for this method to work are fulfilled and completely described. Okay, so now that we fixed that, our method is no longer having a red line to show that there's an error. There are no issues found. So we can go back and continue writing our code. So we have an empty list. What we want to do is applying this function that we've made to our for loop. We will go through and add items that start with import into this empty list. And then we'll create a transaction that will just delete this list. So to do that, we say for each, and we are accessing line pattern element. Let's just call this particular instance of the line pattern element P element to keep it simple. In our collector, what we want to do is if this function here is imported line pattern, and in place of the line pattern class, we will be putting our P element, which is looping through this collector. What we want to say is add to this list the element ID. So lines to delete dot add, and add the element ID of P element. And with a semicolon as usual. And we're having some squiggly lines, so let's try and fix our code. The first thing we are missing here is a bracket for our function here. So let's start by fixing that. Great. The other thing that we are missing here is that I have spelt is imported here with a small I, and I've spelt it here with a capital I. So to fix that, I will just change this to a capital I. Okay, the last mistake I have made here is that I created this function with a line pattern class instead of a line pattern element class, and so it's not able to recognize my line pattern element using this function. So I'll fix that by making this a line pattern element. All right, now all our errors are gone. Our code is back to working. I just showed you that even when you know what to code, sometimes a simple syntax error is enough to give you red lines and mistakes in your code. So don't be too worried when you start to see mistakes. It's not always something wrong with the code. In many cases, it's often a syntax error. I'm just going to move this back a bit to clean up code and just make it look good. Right. So now that we have our for loop, the next thing we want to do is to create a transaction that will actually delete all the lines that have been added to this list. With our using statement, as always, which is the correct syntax for transactions, we will create our transaction. And I'm just going to call this transaction TX. New keyword as always. And the transaction is being applied to our doc. And the string I want to provide here, which will be shown in our undo command if we ever want to undo this add-in, is purge imported CAD line patterns. Right. So now that I've completed that portion, I'll put my curly brackets and start to create the actual transaction. As always, we start the transaction, tx.start, and then we delete the list. So we'll go into the document and say doc.delete, and what we want to delete is this list of lines to delete. I'm just going to tab to accept and end the transaction by committing it. If you don't commit it, you'll not be able to exit the transaction. If you remember, you always need to commit or roll back a transaction. Great. So this alone will actually just delete all the CAD lines from our file, but we won't get any sort of notification to tell us that truly our lines have been deleted. And it's always good as part of user experience to be able to see something when an action takes place. Otherwise, you're just waiting and hoping. So what we want to do is set up a task dialog just to show us that our elements have actually been deleted. So I'll create a message that will return back, and I'll just put that in a string variable. Let's just call it result message. And what I'll do is from that list, I will return a count. So I want to see how many elements were actually in the list. So I'll say lines to delete dot count, and I will add a message next to it with a space to say that number of elements were deleted, and full stop. Okay, end with a semicolon as usual. Now I'm ready for my task dialog. So task dialog dot show, and I will call the task dialog purge imported line patterns. And then I will add my message, result message. I'm just going to tab to accept. And that's it. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Let's just look through to make sure we don't have any red lines. We don't have any issues with our code. We've said that if the pattern name contains import, that's what we want. If this is not the rule, if let's say your import lines start with like an A dash, which is also something that's common, or an A dash CAD or whatever setting was put in the CAD file to bring those lines in, you can actually adjust this part. This is the part that controls what it's reading, and you can think of it more like a find, search, replace function. Okay, without wasting any more time, I'm just going to build this solution, and then we'll head back into Revit to test it using our Addin manager. All right, this is me back in Revit, and you can see here I have all these imported lines. So I'm going to close out of this, go to my Addins tab, go to my Addin Manager manual mode. And at this point, you should see your new class if you set it up correctly. If not, you can reload your DLL or check your Addin manifest file settings to make sure that it's correct. So I'll click on this and I'll say run. And it's working. And it's telling me 148 elements were deleted. Okay, so let's check our line patterns again to see what was actually deleted. I am back in my line patterns, and already I can see that there are no more imports. The script worked. This has been fun, and I'll be using this script in the future if anyone mistakenly imports CAD. FYI guys, if you're new to Revit in general, please do not import CAD. It is the #1 do not rule of Revit. You always link your CAD files or link them through other Revit files or families. You never ever import CADs, and this is the reason why. In the next video, we'll take this a step further and actually delete any line styles that we don't want. Here we'll be accessing the category function of the line styles, and we'll be deleting them also with the same role by name. We can also check through to see if the line style contains an import line pattern, and those are the rules we'll be setting up to make sure that we're able to delete these lines that we don't want. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll be working on line styles. Please subscribe to stay notified. All right then.